I remember the way he looked at me that night, dispassionate, methodical, like I was an item that had been tested and returned too many times to be worth keeping on the shelf. There was no pain in his eyes. No conflict. Just clarity, cold and sharp like the edge of a surgical blade. 7 years of marriage. 4 failed fertility treatments. 2 miscarriages. A closet full of baby books and ovulation kits. And still, he chose our anniversary dinner, our anniversary, to sever the cord. "I want a legacy," he said, his fork resting beside a half-eaten rack of lamb. "I need a real family. You can't give me that." He didn't yell. He didn't cry. He didn't even look away when he said it. As if this was a quarterly review and I'd failed to deliver results. By dessert, he was talking logistics, divorce terms, financial settlements, a timeline that wouldn't interfere with his new relationship. Her name was Ava. She was 24. His assistant. Blonde. Thin. Ambitious in a way that fit neatly into a pencil skirt and heels. Fertile, of course, he made sure to emphasize that. "She wants children," he told me. Soon. As if he was already halfway to building the family I'd spent years tearing my body apart trying to create. When the story spread, because stories like that always do, people admired him for starting fresh, for being brave enough to pursue happiness. No one asked me how I was. No one called. No one came to check on the woman who disappeared quietly, who didn't scream or beg or fight when she was told she was no longer enough. But they misunderstood my silence. I wasn't grieving. I was preparing. While the world assumed I'd slipped into some quiet corner of shame, I was archiving. Collecting. Connecting dots they never thought I'd be smart or angry enough to see. Because long before he walked away, I'd already begun to see through the facade. The expense reports that didn't match up. The whispered names on phone calls he always took in the garage. The folders he tried to hide on his laptop, poorly protected behind a password that was just our anniversary date. I'm not the kind of woman who burns things down in a fit of rage. I'm the kind of woman who builds a fuse line so quietly that by the time you smell the smoke, it's already too late. But if I'm being honest, and I want to be honest now, it wasn't just about him. Not really. He was the spark, not the fuel. The real fire started 3 weeks before he left, when I found the letter. I had been organizing the hallway cabinet, looking for the warranty for the broken dishwasher, when I stumbled across an envelope tucked behind a stack of old tax returns. Cream paper. Faded ink. Addressed to someone I didn't know. Elena Vasilieva. Inside, a birth certificate. My name. Her name. Mother. No father listed. I stared at that piece of paper so long the edges began to blur. It wasn't just that I was adopted. It was that no one had ever told me. No slip-up, no clue. Just years of quiet, calculated deception wrapped up in polite middle-class silence. And then it hit me. The cake. On my 18th birthday, my mother, my adoptive mother, I guess, baked a vanilla cake. She had never baked before. Not once. Not even for holidays. But that day she did. I should have known something was off. They waited until late afternoon. I was still in pajamas when my father called me into the living room. His voice had that distant, disciplinary edge, the one he used when I spilled milk or cried too loudly. My mother wouldn't even look at me. Just stared down at her lap, hands folded, lips tight. "You were adopted," she said. Flat. Final. Like she was reading it off a checklist. "We took you in when you were 2, he added. "Your birth mother couldn't care for you." I didn't cry. I didn't ask questions. I had already read the certificate, already researched the name, already pulled newspaper clippings from the microfilm machine at the library. Elena Vasilieva hadn't abandoned me. She had been taken. Institutionalized after attempting to expose Dr. Richard Halverson, a name I recognized immediately. My father had donated to his foundation. We had Christmas cards from them. I had grown up surrounded by polite mentions of his research and pioneering women's health innovations. What they never mentioned was that he had been accused by Elena of unethical experimentation on female patients. What they never told me was that the woman who bore me was silenced and disappeared into Silver Birch Psychiatric Facility just weeks after making her claims. And now, as I stood in the hallway with a duffel bag in one hand and a birth certificate in the other, I didn't feel abandoned. I felt ready. That first night in the hostel was the longest of my life. I slept with my back against the wall, the envelope clutched to my chest like it could anchor me to something real. The air smelled like bleach and dust, and the walls groaned like old bones settling into rot. I woke up before sunrise and walked to the library. I didn't stop for coffee. I didn't eat. I just sat at the microfilm machine and stared at the image of Elena being led away in handcuffs. Her eyes weren't frightened. They were defiant. That defiance burned something into me that I couldn't unfeel. She hadn't just been punished for telling the truth. She had been erased. And I was next in line. Unless I rewrote the story. And that was the moment I made my decision. I wasn't going to disappear. I was going to make them which I had. First-person narration, female protagonist, calm, firm, strong tone. There are decisions we make that carry the weight of defiance sewn directly into their seams, decisions that do not whisper but roar with quiet rebellion. The moment I signed the paperwork to begin in vitro fertilization on my own, using the samples he had so arrogantly provided during what he assumed would be our last and final attempt, I did not tremble. I did not hesitate. I simply pressed the pen to the page, steady and assured, knowing this wasn't desperation, it was reclamation. They told me I could use it. He signed the papers, I would later explain, calmly and without apology, to the one friend who dared to question the ethics of my decision. He just never thought I would. He had signed everything in his usual careless way, half listening, half smirking, believing that even if nothing came of it, at least he had proven he was willing to try. But he never asked what happened to the remaining samples. He never read the fine print. He never considered that I might be capable of continuing without his permission, his presence, or his name. I relocated first. Quietly. Deliberately. A city just far enough from the ruins of our former life that no one recognized my face, but still close enough for shadows of him to occasionally stretch across the morning news when I passed muted TVs in waiting rooms or checkout counters. He was rising, of course he was. Men like him always do, especially when they package their abandonment as transformation. His empire was growing, brick by self-congratulatory brick, and his new life glimmered in curated photo shoots and charity galas. The woman he left me for? She was always right beside him, styled and smiling, the picture of perfection the world craved. I watched from a distance. Not because I longed for it, but because I needed to understand what he was selling. The illusion. The reinvention. He sold shame like perfume, marketed my barrenness as failure, as fragility, as the justifiable reason for his departure. But shame, like most man-made things, can be repurposed. The IVF treatments were brutal. My body responded in waves, swollen, exhausted, trembling at times. I gave myself injections in the bathroom mirror with hands that refused to flinch, even when the skin began to bruise. I spoke to no one about it, not because I was afraid, but because I refused to let this become anyone's cautionary tale. I wasn't a woman recklessly clinging to hope. I was a woman executing a strategy. There were 3 viable embryos. The first time I heard the heartbeat, soft, rhythmic, insistent, I closed my eyes and let the tears roll down my cheeks, not out of sadness or even relief, but because something inside me had finally reassembled. I was not broken. I never was. The broken thing was the story he built around me. My son was born in early spring, wrapped in soft gray blankets with my mother's name stitched into the corner. He didn't cry at first. He simply blinked, looked around, and settled into the crook of my arm like he'd always known where he belonged. I named him Luca, after the mountain town my birth mother once mentioned in her letters, the letters I found folded beneath newspaper clippings and patient records. He had her eyes. He had my jaw. And undeniably, he had his father's dimples. I didn't run from that truth. I recorded it. 2 years later came twins, a girl and another boy. The embryos had been frozen, waiting like sealed letters from a life I thought was behind me. I named my daughter May, after a poet who wrote of wildflowers growing through concrete. My second son I named Eli, because something about the name felt like peace. 3 births. 3 children. 3 quiet revolutions. And I told them nothing. Not at first. Not until they asked. I raised them in private, far from the performative noise of his success. I refused to take a single cent from him, though legally I probably could have. But that would have rewritten the story in ways I couldn't allow. I wanted their lives to be untouched by his pride or his pity. I didn't want their earliest memories to be courtrooms or custody battles. I wanted them to have stability, warmth, and truth, not just when it was convenient, but from the start. And truth, I've learned, doesn't always need to be spoken immediately. It just needs to be ready. Meanwhile, he climbed. Year after year, his face became more familiar, more filtered, more praised. He was a visionary now, apparently. A philanthropist. The Halverson Wellness Foundation grew beneath his brand like moss on marble, so carefully curated, so consciously removed from the truth of what built it. But something curious began to emerge. For all the pictures of awards and interviews and glittering new homes, there were never any children. Not a single stroller in any hallway. No tiny shoes on the stairs behind family portraits. The assistant, the one he left me for, left him 2 years in. No kids. No explanation. No return. He tried again. And again. 2 more wives, both younger, both photogenic, both temporary. Still no children. The rumors began like seeds in a windstorm, spreading quietly, invisibly. It wasn't her, they whispered. It was him. All along. I never confirmed it. I never needed to. My children were living proof that biology alone isn't the end of a story. Biology can betray. It can disappoint. But choice, that's where real legacy begins. By the time Luca turned 8, he asked me where his father was. Not with anger. Not even with longing. Just a simple, factual curiosity, like asking why the moon changes shape. I didn't lie. I told him he had a father, once, but that man chose a different life, a different story. I told him he was born because I wanted him, not because someone else gave permission. I told him he was loved from the moment he was cells dividing in a dish under fluorescent light, and that his siblings were born from the same fierce, deliberate choice. He nodded, thought about it, then asked if we could get pizza. Later, when May asked, she cried. She said it wasn't fair. I agreed. And then we painted her room together, yellow, with green vines. We didn't need to fix the sadness. We just needed to name it and keep moving forward. Eli was the last to ask. He waited longer. He always watches first, then speaks. When he did, he said, "So, he left you?" And I said yes. And he said, "Then we don't need him, do we?" I smiled, but I didn't answer. Some truths don't need repeating. The irony, of course, is that his legacy, the one he so desperately wanted, existed anyway. But not in his home, not in his name, and not under his control. It was here in my house. In the laughter echoing through the hallways he never saw. In the school plays and science projects and Friday night kitchen dance parties. It was in the little rituals, chocolate pancakes on birthdays, stories read by flashlight under blanket forts, sleepy hugs that smelled like shampoo and crayons. He built his empire on rejection. I built mine on reclamation. And though I never sought vengeance in the traditional sense, I began to understand something deeper. Some forms of revenge are loud, explosive, dramatic. Mine was none of those things. Mine was patient. Mine was maternal. Mine was the kind of revenge that plants roots so deep, they become a forest no fire can touch. But forests need protecting. And legacy, if not guarded, can be stolen, reshaped by those who speak louder, wield more power, or write the first version of history. That's why I started to write it all down. Every memory, every detail, every step of the plan that brought me from a broken anniversary dinner to the home where my children now slept peacefully under handmade quilts. I wrote it not because I needed vindication, but because one day they might. One day, someone might try to tell them a different story about who their mother was or how they came to be. And when that day comes, I want them to know. I was not discarded. I was not defeated. I was not silenced. I was the architect of our survival. And the story, ours, is just beginning. First-person narration, female protagonist, calm, firm, strong tone. There are moments in a woman's life when the air around her changes, thickens, charges, waits. The night of his $10 million charity gala was one of those moments. The kind of night the press loves, where the lights are as blinding as the intentions, and everyone is wrapped in tailored suits and silent desperation. Politicians with gleaming teeth, investors with predatory grins, and socialites with champagne flutes carefully balanced between acrylic nails and hollow laughter. All of them orbiting him, the man who once looked at me like I was defective, like I was the failed prototype of someone else's success. He had branded the gala as a celebration of life and legacy, a phrase I'd seen plastered across the invitations, the online banners, even the backs of the limited edition gift bags given out at the entrance. It was meant to crown his reputation as not just a successful entrepreneur or visionary, but as a benevolent architect of hope. The Halverson Foundation's new campaign had centered on women's health, of all things. Fertility research. Empowering future generations. The irony was almost too rich to savor in one sitting. I had not been invited, of course. Not by him. Not by anyone. But I didn't need an invitation. I arrived precisely 27 minutes after the event began, late enough to command attention, early enough to witness his opening remarks. I wore black silk that clung and shimmered with every deliberate step I took. My heels clicked like punctuation against the marble floor of the hotel ballroom. The entranceway was draped in golden fabric, fake elegance layered over cold intentions, and yet all I could think was how cheaply it all felt next to the real gold that walked beside me. Luca stood at my right, tall and watchful, now 14, but with the emotional steadiness of someone twice his age. His posture mirrored mine, straight, quiet, unbending. On my left was May, in a soft emerald dress she had picked out herself, her curls pinned back with a jeweled clip shaped like a crescent moon. And just a step behind us, Eli, holding a vintage camera I'd given him last Christmas, one that used real film. He liked documenting things. Said the truth felt heavier when it wasn't filtered through screens. As we entered the ballroom, conversation shifted like wind around us. People turned slowly, like they weren't sure why they were staring, only that they needed to. Our presence didn't scream. It didn't demand. It simply existed, and that was more than enough. Look, someone murmured, loud enough for the air to carry but not brave enough to direct it toward us. She looks like those children, another voice whispered. Is that? I mean, his jaw. We didn't need to say a word. Our resemblance did it for us. May leaned in toward me, her voice barely above a whisper. Everyone's staring. I smiled without turning my head. Let them. And then, from the far end of the room, I saw him. He was standing beneath a massive crystal chandelier, framed by a makeshift stage, his arm around the waist of his latest wife, 28, according to the tabloids, though I suspected younger. Her smile was brittle, practiced. The kind you hold for photographers, not for moments of sincerity. He looked older. Not just in years, but in the kind of way success ages you, when it's built on hollow victories and truth swept under silk-covered rugs. He was mid-speech when his eyes found us. For a second, no more than a breath, he froze. His hand stuttered at the teleprompter, his voice catching on a syllable like a jagged rock beneath the surface of water. The pause wasn't long enough to register with the inattentive or the polite, but I saw it. So did my children. Luca's lip curved slightly at the edge. May tilted her chin higher. Eli raised the camera and clicked once. The speech stumbled forward, but his rhythm never returned. He moved through talking points like a man trying to regain control of a ship already taking on water. The audience began to shift. Their attention flickered, then wandered. One by one, heads turned in our direction, glances lingered, whispers ignited. And that's when the first reporter approached. A woman early 30s, wearing a blazer sharp enough to slice through pretension. Her eyes weren't hungry, not yet, but they were curious in that way only good journalists are, interested in things that don't add up. "Ma'am," she said, not in awe, but in measured respect. "Your family is beautiful. May I ask your name for the paper?" I reached into the clutch bag at my side, the one May helped me pick out the week before. I didn't rush. I didn't perform. I simply pulled out the card I had printed for this exact moment and handed it to her with a smile that was neither smug nor submissive. It was the smile of a woman who had waited long enough. "Dr. Alina Graves," I said, each syllable clear and grounded. "And these are the children of the man who once called me Barren." She blinked, stunned, but not confused. I turned before she could ask another question, before she could say anything at all. Because it was never about the follow-up. It was about the delivery. The truth, offered plainly, wrapped not in spite but in power. We walked away just as the spotlight, literal and metaphorical, turned. I could feel it behind me, the stir, the shuffle, the subtle crumbling of a carefully manicured illusion. His team would scramble, I knew. There would be damage control, frantic emails, hushed phone calls to PR specialists and legal advisors. But none of that mattered anymore. The truth had been introduced to the room, and truth is a living thing once spoken. We didn't stay for the rest of the gala. There was no need. The seed had been planted, and I wasn't there to water it. I was there to place it on fertile ground and walk away. Outside, the city buzzed like it always does, indifferent, electric, alive. We walked together down the steps, my children flanking me, their steps steady and sure. May took my hand. Eli asked if he could get a picture of the marquee before we left. Luca, always the quiet one, glanced at me and said, "He looked scared." "He should be," I answered, not out of cruelty, but with the simple clarity of someone who had earned the right to speak without flinching. Later that night, in our hotel suite, I stood at the window with a glass of water in my hand, watching headlights blur into one another like streaks of time slipping past. Behind me, my children laughed at something on television, their voices soft and real and full of the life he never knew they carried. And in that moment, I felt something I hadn't expected. I didn't feel victorious. I felt clean, as if some shadow had finally receded. As if I had finally set something down after years of carrying it in silence. The next morning, I woke to news alerts. Social media mentions. A sudden uptick in searches for Dr. Alina Graves and Richard Halverson children. The press was already spinning, trying to piece the story together, trying to verify timelines and genetic whispers. I didn't read them all. I didn't need to. The truth had done what it always does. Eventually, it had risen. And I had already risen with it. First-person narration, female protagonist, calm, firm, strong tone. The morning after the gala, the world felt impossibly still for the first time in over a decade. I remember standing by the window in the hotel suite, the soft gray light of dawn stretching over the skyline like a curtain finally being drawn. The city was waking, indifferent and beautiful, and somewhere beneath its pulse, the internet was already unraveling a truth it had never expected to find. I didn't have to read every headline to know what they were saying. I felt them like vibrations through the floor, like the quiet thunder before a flood. Infertile ex-wife raises his only heirs without him. Alina Graves, woman he left, mother of the children he couldn't have. The children of Dr. Richard Halverson finally revealed, and they're not his. But they were. Biologically, undeniably, they were his. And yet, they never belonged to him. It didn't take long for the stock to tumble. Investors are loyal only to profit, and legacy scandals, especially ones tangled in fertility deception and public contradiction, carry a cost. Within 2 days, 3 major board members resigned from the Halverson Wellness Foundation. By the end of the week, a 4th released a carefully worded statement expressing concern over unforeseen complications related to past personal matters. His current wife, his 3rd, by the last count, vanished without a word. There were no paparazzi photos of her leaving, no press releases from her publicist. But someone on the inside leaked that she had packed her bags the morning after the gala and flown to a private resort in the Caribbean, her ring left glinting on the edge of the bathroom sink like a punctuation mark to an unfinished sentence. I didn't celebrate the chaos, but I didn't mourn it either. What struck me most wasn't the downfall itself, but how quickly it all began to fracture the moment someone told the truth in a room designed to avoid it. He had spent years building a narrative in which he was the betrayed one, the heartbroken man whose legacy was denied by biology and fate. He never imagined that biology would eventually testify against him. Because the truth, the real truth, was quietly devastating. He was the infertile one all along. Not me. Not the woman he discarded, humiliated, and abandoned in search of someone who could fulfill the image of fatherhood he so desperately clung to. No. It had always been him. He simply never stayed long enough to find out. The embryos I used, the ones I carried and brought into this world with steady hands and a burning heart, were made during our final round of IVF. He had signed the release forms, the storage documents, the fertilization agreements. Everything was legal. Everything was documented. Everything was sealed in the fine print he never cared to read. He never rescinded access. Because he never thought I would do it alone. But I did. And I didn't just do it, I did it well. I raised them with intention, with grit, with love so deep it reshaped the very outline of who I had once been. I watched over them when they had nightmares, when they skinned their knees, when they stayed up late finishing school projects they procrastinated on and didn't know how to fix. I was there for every award, every heartbreak, every fevered whisper of insecurity, and every triumphant breath of confidence that followed. He had never been a father. He had only ever been a donor. And now the world knew. As the headlines spun, and as news panels dissected the ethics of assisted reproduction and retroactive paternity, I stayed quiet. I didn't grant interviews. I didn't accept the podcast invitations, the 6-figure book deals, or the biopic offers that arrived wrapped in cinematic promise. Instead, I focused on what mattered most, my children and the peace that followed after truth had done its work. May received a scholarship offer from a private arts academy 2 weeks after the gala. Luca was asked to lead a youth initiative in our city on resilience and ethical leadership. Eli, ever the observer, launched a photo exhibit titled Still. She rose with portraits of women who had rebuilt their lives after loss, betrayal, and societal dismissal. He included a photograph of me, candid and soft, taken through the living room window as I sipped tea and read to May. They had taken everything I had been through and turned it into foundation. They were the legacy I had never promised, but always hoped for. Then came the letter. It arrived not in a loud knock or with flashing headlines, but in the quiet click of a digital notification. An email from a private address I hadn't seen in years. It was unsigned, of course, but the subject line was unmistakable. Regarding the children. I didn't open it right away. I sat with my hands folded over the keyboard, my breath steady, my heart still. Then, with the calm that had taken me years to earn, I opened it. The message was simple. Too simple. A question disguised as concern, cloaked in hollow civility. "Do they know?" he asked. I didn't respond. Instead, I drafted a letter of my own. And when it was finished, I forwarded it to him, no subject line, no added commentary. Just a digital truth dressed in clarity. Dear Richard, they're not yours to claim. They're mine to raise. And they know exactly who left who. You made choices. I made a life. You left to pursue a legacy. I stayed and built one. The paperwork is ironclad. I broke no laws. But more importantly, I broke every expectation you ever had of me. You said I was barren. I gave birth to legends. And the cruelest part for you? You were always capable of being a father. But you were never brave enough to stay long enough to become one. Alina. I never checked if he replied. Some men, when faced with the consequence of their own cowardice, remain silent not out of guilt, but out of fear. And silence, in this case, is enough. Within a month, he stepped down from the foundation. To focus on personal health and family, the press release said, the irony bleeding through every syllable. His name remained on the building, but even that began to change slowly, subtly. Donors pulled back. Affiliates distanced themselves. And somewhere along the way, the world stopped applauding him. But me? I was invited to speak. At women's conferences. At universities. At roundtables discussing autonomy, ethics, and the right to self-determination. Not because I was special, but because I had survived something that tried so hard to erase me and turned it into a testimony they couldn't ignore. I didn't tell the full story in those speeches. I told my story, the one that belonged to me and the children I raised. The story of a woman who was told she was nothing without motherhood, only to discover she was everything her children needed without compromise. I spoke of quiet defiance, of whispered victories, of the kind of resilience that blooms in the dark when no one's watching. And on my 45th birthday, I sat in a small auditorium as my children surprised me with the announcement of a scholarship fund in my name. The Alina Graves Scholarship for Resilient Women. Created for single mothers pursuing higher education. Funded not by corporations or charities, but by the earnings my children had worked for, saved for, believed in. I wept. Not because I needed recognition, but because I had always feared that in shielding them from his shadow, they might one day feel incomplete. But they weren't. They were whole. They were light. They were legacy. And he? He became a footnote. An early chapter in a book he never had the courage to finish reading. Because he left me for not giving him children, so I gave the world 4 legends he'll never be father to. Subscribe. Because sometimes, revenge doesn't shout. It walks in, holding 4 reasons you should have stayed.